Those big hits that so many football and hockey fans love also show what happens when human missiles collide.
But there's new evidence. Any child can suffer long-term brain damage from just a single concussion. That's a scary proposition for parents. Jordan Burgess found out how to better protect your son or daughter from a brain injury.
Like a brutal ballet, the rhythms of football are choreographed crowd pleasers. But what happens when the music stops?
Good night! You only get one chance with your brain.
They're not just 1 + 1 = 2. It's 1 + 1 = 4 sometimes, and then plus one more is 16. You know, it really amplifies.
Concussions that happen under the Friday night lights or in the Saturday afternoon sun are the easiest to recognize. But we found out your kids could be at risk without ever setting foot on the field, and the lingering effects can impact their schoolwork and their behavior.
You know, these kids that are playing on the playground or playing rec league soccer, we need to be concerned about it because that brain is developing and it's very, very sensitive to hits to the head.
Kaylin Rochong is an active 11-year-old, whether it's soccer in the yard or skating in the street. But when Kaylin was 9, a normal day of play turned into the longest of her young life.
I felt like I was a nail and he was the hammer and he just pounded me.
Kaylin and her brother Kyle were playing capture the flag when it happened.
We heard scream, commotion. We went out to find out what had happened.
Kaylin had collided with her brother. Incredibly, Kyle was fine, but Kaylin fractured an orbital bone and got a concussion.
I felt like I was going to faint and just like fall to the ground.
It's very common that you see other things like their sleep schedule is messed up. They aren't getting the sleep they need. They're having more mood problems and they're irritable.
That one shot to the head can even lead to problems at school.
If a child or a student doesn't understand what's going on, they get more frustrated, their grades plummet, and then that actually can cause those symptoms to actually amplify and get worse.
That's why therapists now work with schools to make sure students with concussions don't take another hit in the classroom.
How does the student take notes? Do they need electronic devices to get through being able to remember what the teacher is saying? Do we need to alter their workload for a while until some of these symptoms resolve?
But you don't have to sit around and wait for your concentration to come back. Just like with an arm or leg injury, you can rehab your mind.
You can do therapy on a brain that's not working.
And that's what goes on here at the Neuro Rehab and Balance Center. Now, one of the things they could check is your visual acuity. Now, basically, you put a crown on like this and you go through this test. Basically, they move your head back and forth and you have to try to figure out which way the E is pointing. Now, what this will tell them is where you're struggling so that way they can work on it. But that's not the only thing they do here.
So I'm going to go ahead and have you step up into the machine for me.
This machine measures balance.
It can allow you to pinpoint where the deficits are and then really make a very specific program to that patient.
Trainers are also getting better at identifying concussions using things like the impact test.
Sometimes an athlete could just kind of fly under the radar and not report their symptoms, so we have to dig a little deeper.
Players take the impact test before the season to develop a baseline. Later, they take a different version of the same test to see if they're showing any signs of a concussion. The science has come much further than the old, how many fingers am I holding up?
The human body, especially the brain, is an area that we know so much more about now than we did maybe 20, 30 years ago.
However, there's still nothing that totally protects you from a concussion. Helmets and mouthpieces aren't foolproof. So what's a parent to do? Should you keep your kids out of contact sports?
And I'm never one to say, you know, sit your kids down in front of the TV because they won't get hurt that way. I think it's good for kids to play and be active.
2 years after her concussion, Kaylin doesn't feel any after effects, and she certainly hasn't slowed down.
How much more careful are you when you play?
Not much.
But Kaylin isn't lining up at halfback on the next play either.
If you have a kid who's had a couple of concussions, especially if they've had a prolonged recovery from one, then you have to start looking at maybe they shouldn't do the high contact sports, and there's other sports. Tennis is a great sport.
But as long as there's kids, there'll be contact. And the ballet on grass we call football still has plenty of acts to follow. because even with all we know about concussions, the music continues to play until it doesn't. And we've learned some pretty surprising numbers when it comes to kids and concussions. In the last decade alone, ER visits by children for traumatic brain injuries were up 60%. So you can see this is a problem that's certainly coming more into focus.
Jordan, I know even tonight in the NHL, Sidney Crosby, the Penguins, is finally returning after missing almost a year because of a concussion. So this is very serious stuff. For parents or coaches out there, what do they need to look out for?
Well, Mark, there's 4 things that you need to look at when you're talking about concussions. They break it down into 4 categories: thinking and remembering, physical symptoms, emotion or mood, and sleep. So if your child has a hard time thinking clearly, is sensitive to light or noise, is sad or irritable, and is very sleepy or not sleepy at all, they could have a head injury. Now you need to get to a doctor right away if they throw up, have slurred speech, seem weak, or have a headache that gets worse. Those are the real danger signs. Yep.
Oh, some great information. Very helpful. Thanks so much, Jordan. And by the way, we want to know what you think, our viewers, about concussion safety. You can weigh in right now on Facebook.